Okay, welcome back everyone. It's now 1 o'clock Eastern, and we're resuming with Daniel Libatique. Um, Daniel Libatique, he, him, his, is a visiting assistant professor of classics at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. He earned his PhD in classics from Boston University in 2018. His research interests include ancient gender and sexuality, narratology, and Ovid. And today's Ovid's birthday. And he enjoys teaching courses on these themes, as you'll hear in the presentation. His paper today is entitled The Commonplace Book, Student-Centered Explorations of Ancient Modern Connections. And now I'm going to hand things over to Daniel.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Hannah. And thank you to you and Joe for putting this conference together. I wanted to start off with a few preliminary comments and a bit of a captatio benevolentiae, the capturing of goodwill, because like Curtis mentioned at the beginning of his talk, I kind of want to take everything I'm about to present and go back to the drawing board with it, just based on the amazing presentations that we've heard from everyone else so far. I feel a bit of imposter syndrome, honestly, being in the lineup for this conference, because I fully acknowledge that I am basically at the start of my own pedagogical and anti-racist education. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to the other presenters and those that have yet to come for everything that I'm learning. I'm learning so much today already. The imposter syndrome is a little bit pointed as well, because what I'm about to present basically is what Nicola and Jonah called out in their presentation in terms of traditional pedagogical presentations. Here's something that I did in the classroom. I thought it was cool, but I'm hoping that you'll take this offering to the conference in the spirit in which it was intended. Some logistical things. My Twitter handle is in my name in the participants tab. So feel free to live tweet and please tag me and use the hashtag RestDiff2. And also throughout my talk, particularly in the middle and towards the end, there will be some oblique references to some episodes of sexual violence in the ancient world. I will not discuss them in depth, but I will be making references to such episodes. So please be aware that that will be coming up towards the middle to the end of my presentation today. All right, the commonplace book, Student-Centered Explorations of Ancient Modern Connections. In the fall of 2020, last semester, I taught an undergraduate Latin seminar entitled Roman Constructions of Gender and Sexuality. The course listed among its semester-long objectives the bread and butter of language seminars: build Latin reading skills, sight reading skills as well, analyze scholarly arguments through secondary readings, get a sense of history and culture. But one course objective would not be served well by quote unquote traditional assessment formats like quizzes or 5-paragraph essays. Compare Roman constructions of gender and sexuality with our own modern notions. Modern gender and sexuality are intensely personal concepts that comprise different layers of meaning, and it is difficult to delineate a prescriptive assessment like write an argumentative essay on the following topic or take this test that respects and invites every student's perspective on such personal topics. Worse, such assessments sidestep rather than capitalize on the opportunities for personal reflection that gender and sexuality offer. Such connections are vital if the course is to have any lasting effect beyond the classroom. Therefore, I needed a semester-long assignment that would be true to my course objective and allow students to evaluate their present through the lens of the past. This talk explores my solution, the commonplace book assignment, in which my students kept a running journal of passages from our semester's readings that they found interesting for whatever reason. At the end of the semester, they synthesized and analyzed their passages to write a reflection on an aspect of Roman gender and sexuality that intrigued them or interested them the most. The assignment freed my students from the anxieties of traditional assessments like onerous time restrictions or strict adherence to citation style guides, and invited them to leverage their creativity, passions, and individuality to create a reflection far more impactful than traditional assessments would have allowed. My aim in this talk is not to prescribe a universal assessment that will work in every single classroom, nor do I claim to have made any groundbreaking pedagogical discoveries. I merely hope to give a firsthand account of a really cool project that allowed students to produce remarkable reflective work on their own terms, to advocate for a student-centered approach to assessment as a means towards inclusivity, and to share what I learned as a teacher who needed to think outside of the box in a truly extraordinary pandemic academic environment. To set the stage for discussing the assignment, I first need to explain the exigent circumstances beyond my pedagogical goals that necessitated a non-traditional assessment structure for the course. Like many schools that were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, the College of the Holy Cross operated almost entirely remotely in fall 2020, last semester. That had been our mode of operation since March 2020, the semester before, when the pandemic began. And it is impossible to overstate the level of disruption faced by every member of our community that began in March 2020 and persisted well into the fall. When we first went remote in spring 2020, Holy Cross added a week into the semester schedule so that we faculty could reorganize our syllabi, adjust our assignments, and prepare a classroom experience, quote unquote, that would get as close as possible to what our students would have gotten in person. No amount of prep, however, could have mitigated the damaging, taxing effects of isolation, fear, and stress brought on by the pandemic. Students at home suddenly were tasked with caring for relatives, older and younger, who needed assistance, getting jobs to support the increased household expenses, worrying about family members who are essential workers in the medicine and service sectors, feeling anxiety about catching the coronavirus or spreading it unwittingly to others if asymptomatic. All of this, in addition to maintaining full course loads taught by professors like myself who had never been trained in the difficult medium of online instruction. In addition, most students did not have access to resources like private spaces to study, the physical books of the library, or any of the other on-campus resources that are conducive to academic progress. One benefit of the pandemic switch to remote instruction, however, was the opportunity for me as a teacher to take stock of the way that I assess my students in my classes and to determine whether such assessments actually serve a fruitful pedagogical goal or are simply artifacts of the way that I was taught in good or bad ways. Argumentative research essays that have an intro with a thesis, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Timed, closed note quizzes and exams. A fully remote format made these types of assessments difficult, if not impossible, to implement. For example, argumentative research essays might require physical resources like library books that my students literally could not access from home. With timed closed note quizzes or exams, I couldn't watch to make sure that my students weren't using their notes or other resources, and it was difficult to find a suitable online quiz tool to time them. But let's take a step back. What is the point of timing a quiz or an exam? A timed assessment's ostensible purpose is to evaluate a student's ability to recall material quickly, but it does not necessarily indicate that the student can perform higher order functions with the material like detailed analysis or careful evaluation. Moreover, the negative effects of timed assessments far outweigh their potential evaluative benefits. The stress of a timer impacts a student's cognitive ability negatively, even if all other environmental variables are conducive to test taking. A timer can also be exclusionary from an accessibility or economic standpoint. Students who would benefit from extra time on an assessment might have difficulties securing academic accommodations from their institution or be reticent to even try to get them in the first place if they've had bad experiences in the past. Also, students with shaky internet connections or little to no access to reliable technology might experience a loss of internet or other uncontrollable event while trying to complete a timed assessment. Then, why should I prevent my students from accessing notes or resources to which they would have access in most other contexts, like preparing a Latin passage for class? One can argue that in a different type of course, like an introductory language course, closed note assessments incentivize memorization and set a student up for later success. But even in that context, I personally, as a teacher, would rather habituate my students to morphology, syntax, and vocabulary through repeated exposure and consistent reinforcement in class and in homework, rather than forcing them to cram their brains full for a one-off, pressure-filled testing environment. All the more, in an advanced seminar, I want my students to be able to analyze and evaluate the ancient sources, higher order functions than simply recalling or regurgitating paradigms or dictionary entries,